Good morning.
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 It is good to be here with you all in celebration this morning. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah? No? How about now? Is it on? Okay. I'll move it up. So as you heard, our theme today is underground love. And the Christmas story is very much a sanitized story in the way that it is told and shared for the most part in our culture. And in this congregation, we're trying to remember that the roots of the Christmas story are not one from the top down, but from the bottom up. It's a story of the grassroots. It's a story of minority people, an ethnic and religious minority people in the backwoods place of this great empire. And that is the place where the revolution began. That is the place where the symbol of God rose up. That is the place where we need to look if we're seeking hope and love and joy and peace. And so we can talk about that. I can talk about that, but I thought it would be pretty cool today to actually bring Jesus himself here to Valley Mountain. We have a performance artist named Jamil, Suleman here today, who's a rapper, a youth educator, an activist, a teacher, a guy with cool shoes, right over there. So please give him a warm welcome.
Hi, everybody.
So Jamil, you started Josh Day, and you go by Josh instead of Jesus when you're in your full costume.
Right.
First, could you tell us why Josh instead of Jesus?
Yeah. So the name Jesus is Greek, if I'm not mistaken, and so is Christ. But if you trace back the name to the historical Jesus, it seems that his name was probably Yeshua ben Yosef, or Joshua, son of Joseph. So Yeshua is Joshua, Joshua is Josh, and one of the reasons why is because Josh is such a common name, and it's like a regular person's American regular name, right? Very common. So I felt like it was a great way to just start bringing up the depth of the character itself was to make him common, right? Not just some, bring him down to earth a little bit. So
yeah. So my understanding is that you dress like Jesus with the robe and the sash. I've seen you actually at protests and stuff.
Yeah.
And do you just go to protest, or do you go to just walk around, go to the grocery store?
I've done it all, man. I would say, it started off actually, if you want to kind of want to know the roots of it or whatever. I was growing my hair out, and I was kind of doing it. I was kind of doing it as a spiritual calling to some extent. I felt like I was being called to do this, to grow my hair out. For whatever reason, and as it grew out, I have a beard. I'm a Muslim Indian American guy, so I look like a brown-skinned Jesus. And as a rapper, a friend of mine, Julie C., who's a local MC activist as well, was hosting an event at a place called Black Coffee that used to be in Capitol Hill, and it was an activist kind of coffee shop, that co-op that got established right after the Occupy movement, or right around the Occupy movement. I'd hang around there, and she'd throw a show called Church, and it was on Sunday, and I had my hair grown out, and I had a mixtape that just dropped, and I was like, well, this is kind of too good to do it. So I made my costume. I went on YouTube, and I cut white cloth and made it, and it looked great. It looked like Jesus. So that was kind of in the background. And then a few months later, I did it again, and that was it. About a year or two later, there was a bunch of protests going on in the city, and one of them was a Wells Fargo protest. and Nikita is a friend of mine, Nikita Oliver, who ran for mayor and is in the People's Party, was going to go speak, and everybody was going to go speak. So I was like, oh man, you know, I got the whole Jesus thing. What if I just showed up to the thing and I was like, my dad's pissed? and they were like, wow. I was like, dude, you know, and it was a form of, I was like, listen, it's a form of social justice performance art. And I did it, and it was a hit, right? And it was such a hit because what was interesting about it was I had spoken in council chambers before as myself, as an activist, even done performance rap, kind of whatever. And usually the response is generally the same from the council members in security or whatever. You get your general responses from those folks. When I had Jesus costume on, it completely disarmed people, and it forced them to be receptive to what I was saying. And then when I did it in a lighthearted, my dad's pissed you guys kind of way, I Buddy Christed him a little bit. And that's what made it kind of digestible. And then I was able to slip in, like, you know, the banks and the flipping of the tables, and, you know, I kind of was able to reference this stuff, and it was funny, but important and relevant. You know, we did that for homelessness stuff too. We did that with a bunch of things that just got brought up. I did that for Josh Day. I came up to the council meeting, I was like, my birthday is coming up. Here's an empty box, put some food in it, and let's do your job, you know?
Could you tell us about Josh Day?
Yeah, so once I donned the costume, right, it went viral, basically, around the city, kind of. And a bunch of articles sprung up from The Stranger and The Weekly and things like that, and people would call me to show up as Jesus. And at one point I did go to the council meeting, and then I left. And I spent a whole day dressed up as Jesus, which I would never suggest. Never do that. It was funny, it was entertaining, it was also scary and revealing in a lot of ways. He is a trigger to a lot of people, and not necessarily a good one, right, for some. So it was interesting to take on that role, but in process, people would come up to me and start telling me about me. They'd be like, you know, you're a Palestinian revolutionary and blah, 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 blah. And so I had to start learning about who Yeshua was. One of my big books to reference was Zealot by, what's the guy's name? Reza Aslan. Incredible book. And I started to really pick apart the revolutionary figure that was Yeshua ben Yosef and the time that he lived in. It was incredibly fascinating. I was like, this guy's great. I was like, man, and it's such a simple philosophy, right? So Christmas was coming up, and the whole thing was a parody for the most part. It wasn't like super serious. But Christmas was coming up, and I was like, all right, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get these fish sandwiches, right? And I'm just gonna roll around town and just give them out. And I'm gonna feed, you know, whatever. And so I was talking to friends of mine, Tarek and a bunch of others around in the neighborhood community, and it started picking up, and more people wanted to get involved quickly. And you know, part of it was the parody, is entertaining, right? But another part was like, oh, this guy's doing something really smart with it, and they wanted to hop on board and get involved. So people were volunteering. They were giving me stuff. We started meeting every week to plan this event in the same space where I live, which is in the Mount Baker Artist Lofts. And long story short, what started off as like, maybe I'll give some fish sandwiches away, turned out to be like a 2-day volunteer thing where we fed 200 people music, live music. We bussed people in. We got bus tokens and bussed them in. We got a bunch of community support. We got donations, money, hand warmers. There was a needle exchange. There was everything that was needed for folks at that day. And it wasn't a charity event. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like, come and get the soup and then buy. It was an open celebration that everybody was eating soup. There was a moment in time, I remember, when there was I know a member of the street community, because there was gifts and stuff all over, coats and shoes and toys and everything. It was everything. And he was giving a board game to a kid. And I was like, yeah, see, this is really what it's all about. Now you're giving someone who is used to maybe getting in Christmas, you're giving this person an opportunity to actually give, which also is an opportunity to get in a way, right? And feeds one in that way. It was incredible. I mean, I could go on and talk about how powerful of an event it was. We all walked away pretty heavily affected by it. And I do want to add this because this is just the power of that event. Afterwards, a friend of mine who was involved in the event is a Pokemon Go player. And Pokemon Go is big. I don't know if you guys play Pokemon Go. I don't, but for those who do, it's huge, right? So he's big in the Pokemon Go community in Seattle, and Josh Day inspired him. And what we were doing is we were collecting dry food and towels and stuff, blankets. So he started doing that throughout Seattle once a month with Pokemon Go people. And Pokemon Go is internationally linked. Well, the biggest Pokemon Go player in Uruguay was depressed and just couldn't get through it. And came across James over here in Seattle giving away stuff for Pokemon Go. And it inspired him. And so he's big, okay, he's big time over there. Big business over there, okay? He started doing it. Now everywhere, now all over the country in Uruguay, they have these Pokemon Go players meeting up and gathering blankets and canned food and all the stuff that we did for Josh Day. And they're doing it not for Josh Day. It's nothing to do with Josh Day. It's just that vibration, that frequency that emanated from that event is now carrying on. So that just goes to show you how powerful giving, like a genuinely giving is, and how people just want to do it. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. Oh, and that's a great segue for the
I'm unashamedly, unapologetically promote Josh Day as a Christmas activity.
Come by. It's going to be noon to 6. It's going to be music. There's going to be a Joshua tree. The Raging Grannies will be there. Santa Libre. Bob, you guys know Bob.
Yeah.
Nikita is going to be there. There's going to be Indigenous Blessing, which is how we always start, because this is Duwamish land. So yeah.
Where?
Mount Baker Artist Lofts. Right off the Mount Baker light rail stop. So, and it's ground level accessible.
Yeah. So there's just about 30 flyers, so if you're in a couple or whatnot, share. But
And
in
put
the
them
past,
up if you like too.
yeah, we can make more as a copy machine over there. This is so cool. In the past, Valley Mountain's done Christmas Day activity to gather people together, usually like a white elephant exchange at somebody's house. Honestly, this year, like Josh Day.
Yeah.
Please.
Let's show up Josh
Yeah.
Day.
Yeah.
So I want to open it up for questions in a minute here, but I just can't help but you cut off the hair. So
Yeah.
What's the future going to be like? How are you
Yeah. Right? And it wasn't for this haircut, by the way. I just got this haircut. People are like, nice haircut. You ditched Jesus for the haircut. I'm like, no. I actually shaved my head. Because, you know, when you shave your head, I had gone through some things in the summer and I was like, I need to get all this weight off of me and start over. And I was like, if I need to go to Jesus again, I'll get the wig. So Josh will be at Josh Day. I'm acquiring the necessary accessories. It's not as easy to jump into what I call the Josh tune, which I could have just done before. I could literally showed up to the council with the, in this robe, right?
Yeah.
Which makes it so incredible. It was just a white robe. All of a sudden, I put my hair down, wear a white robe, and every phone's come out. I mean, I'm serious. Like, people's cell phones come out,
Yeah.
So the future is I get a wig and,
Yeah.
hopefully it looks as good. Because that was my real legit hair, man. Well, I was looking like you. You might have to check on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, most people haven't seen the full extent.
Oh, man. Josh. Wow.
I used to, when I put it down, people do often, especially when I had a bigger beard. Jesus, I get Jesus all the time. Until, there it is. Until about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, I was in divinity school, and finally there started to be some awareness. And there was a black student there, who saw me with the helmet down, and he's like, "You look like a white version of Jesus." I look like a white version of the real thing, which I loved, and I was like, that's dialed in.
Right.
So I guess my last question before we open up on what have been those? I hear the response from city council is kind of different, but how do people on streets and subways have protests?
It's generally speaking, it's kind of all over the board, but there is a general appeal to it. I think most people like it. I think most people at least find it funny, right? Like, because it looks like I'm dressing up like Jesus. So I do think it has like a generally good appeal. But what I've noticed is its ability to disarm people. When I'm dressed up like Jesus, Josh, and I'm walking around doing the whole Josh thing, which is basically me being like a completely normal guy. Like the Josh in my mind is Jesus or whatever Josh. And if you read the Zealot book and kind of understand and unpack what was going on and where in that time that they lived, Black Lives Matter was just going on over there. Same thing was going on. You had your Kaepernicks probably in the stadium, taking the knee. And Jesus was just another activist who was a special one, of course, not just any old activist, but that was the voice that Josh was coming from. And so what I've noticed is that when I dress up like him, it's a cultural icon that disarms people, like Santa or Easter egg bunny. That's what Jesus is now. It's not like a his serious. Like if I dressed up like Hitler, it'd be different, right? But Jesus has almost seemed like, are you even real, dude? It's been thousands of years. Maybe you were a mushroom, whatever. People have their beliefs, right? But it immediately disarms people. It gives them the ability to become a kid again, because their introduction to Jesus was when they were probably a kid, because you're talking about the most famous person of all time. And what's interesting is that when they become a kid, I get to see in them something that other people don't. And that's when I feel I actually am Jesus, or am feeling what he is feeling, or felt. And I also feel like when you call that spirit, you're going to feel what he felt. And some of those feelings that I felt while wearing that are not good feelings. It is a deep sorrow for the world to see the just absolute ridiculousness of it all, because I'm walking around in a white robe, man, and people giving me food, and they're giving me, they want to take pictures, and I'm getting ushered in, like, tell me, man, police officers are taking selfies with me. I mean, dude, police officers are not taking a selfie with me if I'm not dressed up like Jesus. A whole other picture, whole other body cam is on when I'm not dressed up like Jesus, right? And that actually happened to me in the summer, which was interesting. But interesting responses. Yeah. He's powerful.
Well, I like what you said, that you felt like you were like Jesus or whatever. I mean, I know that can be. You don't want to be like, I'm the second
coming. No, definitely not.
Because
people are definitely
issues, but I believe, like in mystical Christianity, the goal is to kind of have a union with God or a connection with Jesus and live in that same rhythm of life. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem to sort of seek to be connected, to be united, to be part of the same stream. To me, that's a desirable.
Yeah, it was very, very powerful. Yeah, and one can only hope to touch that as, you know,
Yeah.
a little bit, yeah.
So questions for Jamil?
That's true. That's what I was like, maybe, look, dude, you know?
Yeah.
Shit was hit back then. Unpack that one real quick.
30 seconds.
Yeah, no, you know, being Muslim, American, being Muslim, Jesus is a prophet in Islam. We call him Isa. It's the Arabic version of the name of Jesus. And it's a risky thing that, first of all, you're not, in Islam, you're not supposed to embody any prophet. That's why there's not a depictions of Prophet Muhammad. And I come from a Sufi tradition of Islam. So our interpretation of Islam is very mystical, kind of like the Gnostic Christians per se, or what have you. We have a very internal experience with Allah, as opposed to kind of the more orthodox stuff. So that gives me, in my mind, the ability to do what I want. Like, you know, parody and dance and music, it's all, you know, Sufism, man. Jesus is Sufi to me, straight up. But that didn't bode well for a lot of my elders in the Muslim community. So I surprisingly got more kickback from Muslim folks than anybody else. Well, obviously because I'm from the Muslim community, so they're gonna be the ones who are gonna reach out to me. But yeah, it was like, no, brother, don't, and you know, what are you walking a very thin line? And it was very, yeah, it was kind of like there was a lot that went with this. It wasn't just like I was dressed up and, hey, everybody, funny, bye. No, I took home a lot. I had to carry a lot, in a way, carry that cross in a way of taking on this persona. So it was complicated, to say the least. But I think inevitably, for example, like, Muslims are good people, right? And because I am from the Muslim community, when I did ask for donations, most of them came from Muslim people. So, you know, hundreds of dollars came from people who are Muslim. And they were just like, oh, cool, man, as long as, you know, we trust that you give it to the right. And it did go to the right people. So I think it was an important thing for me to experience, to understand what the faith means, because I'm not a very religious person in that way, but I do see it all, wow, coming together now in this time. I do, and it's actually helped me tap back into Islam. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
That's a good question. It's been brought up to me for sure before. The way I interpret this is a couple ways. One is I put it in a lens of social justice and oppression. So am I appropriating Christianity, which is completely now appropriated by white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy? Sure. You know, but what I'm doing is I'm parodying it and doing a satire of it to kind of bring it back to what I believe is the original causative reason of Christ, right? Yeah. So I feel like I am walking a very thin line there, but I'm doing it with the I believe the correct intentions. Is it? Who knows? But you know, we all kind of have to walk our own decision. Now, as far as depicting Muhammad, I would not do that. Reason being is not because it is out of respect, obviously, for the Muslim community. It's also because why would I do that, right? What is the real reason? Why would I parody Josh? to bring Jesus down to earth, to take a figure that has been kind of manipulated and make him real again, and being played by a person of color, right? So I feel like that's almost reappropriating what was reappropriating in a way. But for Islam, like this, Islam is the oppressed community in this equation. So for me to parody them while being one is a very kind of, I think, unnecessarily violent thing to do to that community at this point. Because if anything, we need people to understand what Islam was about, or is about, and what the Prophet Muhammad was about. And I can parody that, but it would cause more conflict than really create solutions in that way. So, you know, it's tricky, because I understand people being like, why are you dressed up like Jesus then? But, you know, I kind of have my reasons, yeah.
I think he was a performance artist, so
I think so.
Makes sense to me.
So I'm not sure what sect of Islam you were learning about. But in Islam, the kind of orthodox school of Islam, Jesus is a Muslim. He's not a Christian. Isa is the most important prophet in Islam. He's the most quoted prophet in the Quran. So the powers bestowed upon Christ in the Christian faith are in Islam in the same capacity, right? The differences are the death scenario of Jesus. But everything else is exactly the same, including the return of Jesus in the time of the judgment, or what have you. So when I parody Josh or Jesus and put it in the line of Christianity, is it a joke? It is. But it's a joke on what has been created from the white supremacist takeover of Christianity, right? And that commodification that has created now a white-skinned Jesus with the blue eyes and blonde hair. That it's all about story, right? So that story has been taken, manipulated, and now created into something that was used to enslave African people, to perform a genocide on the indigenous people of this area, all in the name of Christ. So it's a joke, which is really what I'm saying is a parody, more of a satire of that image, and bringing it back to the root of what we believe Jesus, in a deeply spiritual, esoteric sense, represented and meant, which is unconditional love, which is the things that all of these prophets have been. It doesn't matter what the prophet is, or who the ancestor is, or who the elder is. It's essentially the same lesson: love everybody. And so taking on that persona, looking like that, and then saying, just love everybody. Is that a joke? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but it's certainly a parody and a satire. But is it a form of is it disrespectful? That is your interpretation. I can't interpret it for you, but that's how I see it and present it to the best of my abilities, kind of like that. So I hope that answers that a little bit. Sure. No, I met a few on the streets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I met a couple who were like, "What do you mean you can't?" Right. Well, somebody came up to me and was like, if this was at night, when it started getting dark, which I definitely suggest don't dress up like Jesus at night on Capitol Hill when it's like Friday night, because someone told me to, come up out your sandals. I don't need your word. And I'm like, I'm just costume, it's just a parody. But for that person, it was not. It was a trigger. And it was very serious at that point in time. This person was gonna physically harm me. Luckily, the cops came. I'm serious. The cops came and protected me of all people. I don't think they would have protected him then, but the scary part was the folks who didn't necessarily think I was out of my mind, but thought I was actually Jesus, and was like trying to come and harm them or whatever, you know. So it was yeah. Yes, like 2 people did come up and said, they were like, I'm Jesus, you know, you're not. And so yeah, it was a scary. It can be a scary situation when you go into that, because when this is the most important person in world history, pretty much. So that trigger, if someone was abused, for example, but their parent was a Christian, and so they took them to church, but they were abusive, and so their conditioning is to associate this man with abuse. I interacted with that. I had a couple people who were like, "You can't save me," and wanted to like physically harm me, and I was like, I gotta go now, because this is not what this is about. So yeah, there's a lot going on. We could talk a lot.
Yeah, much more to talk about. Thank you for the question. Thank you, Jamil.